Hey, what's up guys, this is Kisune 101 from BuzzEVPokerStrategy.com. Today I'll be talking about the mathematics behind 3-bet bluffing. Basically, how does Villains PFR raise sizing and your 3-bet sizing relates to 4 equity. The 4 equity calculation is pretty basic, and I will assume that most of you already know it, and if you don't know it, you should definitely continue listening to this. But for those of you that already know it, there's still some interesting things in this presentation that I'll be talking about, especially your 3-bet sizing out of position. Your 4 equity formula. Okay, first assumption I want to make here is that your 3-bet is a pure bluff, which means you either win a pot or you lose your 3-bet. I'm not going to go into any more complicated calculations of when he calls or when he 4-bets. Second assumption is that calculations are done for break-even bluffs, which means when your EV equals to 0, any more 4 equity, if you're getting 4 equity above the calculated 4 equity, which means you're printing money, below, which means you're losing money, and if you're getting the same 4 equity, you're actually breaking even. Just from the basic EV calculation and equating the EV to 0, you get this basic formula. Your break-even 4 equity is basically your 3-bet size divided by your pot size plus 3-bet size. It's a pretty common formula that everybody should know, and if you don't, you should memorize this formula by heart. It's not very hard to memorize. Okay, some pre-calculation questions. And I wanted you to ask yourself, what's your standard 3-bet sizing in different positions? Do you have a standard 3-bet sizing in different positions? Most of you probably have. I want you to think about it for a moment. And the second question is, what's your average 4 equity needed when you 3-bet as a bluff? Assuming you don't ever see a flop, and assuming you don't ever have a hand. Basically, is when you want to bluff somebody, the first thing you look at usually is his 4 to 3-bet, right? So what 4 to 3-bet do you, what percentage, when you see that percentage, it set something off your head to 3-bet him a lot. What is that particular number do you think that you need? The last question I want to ask is, how does Villains preflop size affect 4 equity and your 3-bet sizing? This is something I realize when I'm doing these calculations, and I think that you might find pretty interesting. I'll do 2 examples. The first example is when Villains 3-bet at 3 big blind in the cutoff and you 3-bet to 9 big blinds in the button. Pretty common situation. Notice you 3x it on the button, you didn't pot it. A pot would be 10.5 big blinds in this case. The pot size is 4.5, which is 3 big blinds plus the blinds, which is 1.5. Your 3-bet size is 9 big blinds. Thus your break even 4 equity is 9 divided 4.5 plus 9, which is 66.67%. The second example is when you're in a small blind and when Villains PFR raises 2.5 big blinds on the button, which is pretty common nowadays. People use 2.5 or 2 big blinds on the button, and you pot it to 8.5 big blind in the small blind. The pot is 2.5 plus 1.5, which is 4 big blinds, and your 3-bet size is 8 big blinds. Notice here that your 3-bet 2 size and your 3-bet size is different. Your 3-bet size is actually your 3-bet 2 size minus off the 0.5 big blinds that you already invested. If always remember this, if you do not, you will always make a error in your calculation if you do not minus off the 0.5 big blinds. So your break even 4 equity is 8 divided by 12, which is also 66.67%. If you notice something very interesting here, that is when the first example you raise it to 3x, which is less than pot size, and you need 66.6% for equity. Here you're raising it to pot size, and you still need 66.67% equity for equity. And this is what I want to talk about, is basically your risk to reward ratio. As you can see here, I already did the 4 equity calculations based on your position, your villain preferred race sizing, your 3-bet sizing. Yeah. As you see, the gray lines are basically when you actually 3-bet it to pot size. And just now I was talking about your risk to reward ratio. Basically, your risk to reward ratio is the amount you're risking divided by your reward, which is the pot. In the first example, in position villain preferred raise to 3 big blinds. When you pot it to 10.5 big blinds, you're risking 10.5 to win 4.5. And in the second situation, when villain preferred raise to 2.5 big blinds and you raise it to 9 big blinds, you're actually risking 9 to win 4 big blinds. As you can see there, your ratio is not the same, and the ratio is less when villain preferred raise size is smaller. And what does this do is, this result in a smaller break even for equity. That's not when I'll ask you to ask the question, how much for equity do you need? What is that magic number that you see on opponents for the 3-bet stat that will make you think that it's profitable to be 3-betting him a lot? Let's make an assumption that that number is 70. Okay, so anything below 70, you still have a very decent 3-bet bluff spot, right? What does this mean is that the smaller the opponent 3-bet, you can actually make your 3-bet sizing bigger and still get the same full equity needed. Let's take an example of when you're in a big blind. When you're big blind, when you pot it, when villain make it to two big blinds in the button, when you pot it, you need 61.11% for equity. If you raise 7.5 big blind, which is 1 big blind more than pot, you need 65% for equity. But when villain preferred with a 3 big blind and you pot it, you still get 65% for equity needed. Sorry. What this means is when villain raised to to get 65% for equity, when villain raised to 3 big blind, you should be potting it, and when villain raised to 2 big blinds, you should be raising it to 7.5 big blinds. But I would actually even raise to more, maybe 8 big blinds or 8.5 big blinds. You're still getting less than 70% break even for equity. And this is a very important thing I want to talk about, is when you're out of position facing a very small preferred raise size, is that you want to make it bigger. And the reason is very simple. You basically want to make the stack to pot ratio as small as possible when you're out of position. In the first 3-bet article, I talk about raising a depolarized range in position because villain or most of your your average regulars will be calling a lot in position because they think they have a position advantage. And I was talking about that a lot of people actually believe that your positional advantage is not a lot, because your stack to pot ratio is, as your pot to stack ratio decreases, your positional advantage actually decreases. And this is exactly what raising bigger out of position does. It decreases the stack to pot ratio. Assuming you have 100 big blinds and you're within 100 big blinds, raising it to 6.5 big blinds when villain make it 2 big blinds on the button, you're giving him the same pot odds when you raise it to 9.5 big blinds when villain preferred raise 3 big blinds on the button. You're potting it, he's getting 2 to 1. But the significant difference is the stack to pot ratio. Now when you raise it to 6.5, he can actually call with a wider range, and it's correct for him to call with a wider range because the stack to pot ratio is larger and he have more implied odds to out flop you. That's the first reason, and second reason is he have positional advantage over you. And it's basically a mistake to make it too small out of position. Like, I find it weird that people are still raising it to pot out of position when I make it 2 big blinds on the button. You know, I make it 2 big blinds on the button as a standard, and when someone raises it to 6.5, you know, I just have a smile on my face because I can be calling with a wide range and be playing profitably in position and determining when the stack goes in, you know, when I want to go broke or when would I want to shove him, you know. I find it even funnier when people make it smaller than pot out of position. You know, sometimes they make it 6 big blind, they 3x my raise, which makes no sense to me. You know, which makes me even happier. You know, it does not matter that I'm calling with an inferior range because I'm calling it to outflop your range. You know, so when I actually flop one pair, I'll be playing very passively. But when I flop something that can beat aces, you know, I'll be playing very aggressively. And you know, when money gets in, you know, you probably won't be, your aces won't be good. You know, that's a very important point to remember here. You know, so in conclusion, first thing that I talk about is fold equity. So are you getting enough fold equity? When you're bluffing, you know, who are you bluffing? Are you getting enough fold equity? Like, I think 70% fold equity is pretty high nowadays. But if somebody have a fold to 3-bet of 70% and higher, you know, it's definitely, you'll be 3-betting a lot as a bluff. And if the guy have less than that, you'll be 3-betting a lot as for value, obviously. The second takeaway from here is when Villains preferred raise size is smaller, a pot 3-bet is smaller and the risk to reward ratio is less. This means you need less fold equity for you to break even. This means you can 3-bet bigger than pot and get the same break even fold equity. You know, I've shown you here that, you know, when you raise it bigger than pot, you get 65. But in this situation, when you pot it, you get 65. You know, so it's basically you're getting the same break even fold equity. And here is actually, you know, it's actually better to be betting bigger than pot, as I already mentioned. Yeah, so you know, that's it for this presentation. You know, if you like it, please share this on Twitter and Facebook. If you're watching this on my website, you know, the share button's on the left side. And if you're not watching this on my website, you can go to www.plusapokerstrategy.com to read more of my content. Do add me on Twitter. My nickname is +8poker101. Have a nice day thinking about 3-bets, practicing 3-bets. And if you're not already doing it, I will strongly suggest that you start 3-betting bigger out of position. You know, it's just better. It's just a better strategy in general, with one exception. That's if your opponent plays a 4-bet fold strategy in position. You know, if he only 4-bets and fold and does not call your raise with a wide range, then you do not want to be making it big, because you know, when he 4-bets, you're gonna lose more. Yeah, once again, thank you for watching and have a nice day.